On the first day, I don't know if Barbara told you this, Nicholas showed up on set with a penciled-in mustache, sort of, a little bit like a John Wooders look, clearly penciled in. I mean, it was an interesting choice, but to the last minute, when you've got $3 million finally in the bank and the entire crew waiting, one little hairline pencil thing can throw the whole thing off.
Everything can come down to a pencil-thin mustache sounds like the first draft of a William Carlos Williams poem. But for everyone that worked on Vampire's Kiss, it exemplifies the film's constant teetering on the brink of disaster. Vampire's Kiss led a Job-like existence. Every moment was its own mustache, which had the producers trying to sustain themselves on the tiniest of victories. At some point during the production's narrative, it becomes increasingly obvious that the universe was trying to tell the crew something. The world is simply not ready for Vampire's Kiss. And it wasn't. Writer Joe Mignon.
I wrote After Hours when I was at Columbia Film School, and Martin Scorsese directed it, and that was the beginning. And Vampire's Kiss came 4 years later. I do remember this. I do remember my girlfriend at the time said, "Oh, you're going to be in Barbados. Why don't you write a nice, happy love story that takes place in Barbados? It could be filmed, have this happy shoot down in Barbados, on a beautiful island." And I obviously ignored that shit. We did New York, dark, crazy.
Producer Barbara Zitwer.
I had wanted him to write a script that was set in Barbados because I wanted to go shoot a movie in Barbados. And I thought it'd be fabulous. And so he was down there, and he's like, okay, and he's going to stay down there and write the script. And then when I read the script, there was one line of the script that said something like, go back to Barbados, man. That was it. It was all set in New York. And I'm like, all right, cannot take the New York out of this guy.
I had another screenplay that was out there that, was a really weird script called Motorama and wasn't going anywhere. And, I kind of realized, it's just such a conceptual movie. And so I wanted to write something that might have been easier to sell. I started thinking, all right, horror usually is something that gets made. Even though I knew that if I did horror, it would not be a conventional horror film. But I thought if I just sort of started with that, and then I was narrowing it down to what kind of horror. And I remember this process of okay, well, I was thinking that I wanted to direct it at first. My aspiration was originally to direct it. So I had to think of something that could be low budget without a lot of special effects. So I thought finally the vampire genre, a vampire could be portrayed with just cheap fangs and a cape, although we didn't use a cape in the movie, but as opposed to some big monster or even a werewolf. You need to kind of do the transition with all the hair, but a vampire, just a little, attitude and fangs, and you're there. I remember thinking that would keep it low. I also remember distinctly thinking, well, if you're going to try to direct it, you want to be comfortable and on your turf. So New York. And I thought New York would be a good setting anyway. Those are the things that go through my mind. I figured something accessible or as close to accessible as I could do, which was the horror genre, or could be sold that way. Something in the vampire genre, some play on that, although it really isn't. Low budget New York, something that could be done on my turf, and a really castable main part. So I sat down and wrote Vampire's Kiss.
Mignon's script follows Peter Lowe, a womanizing literary agent who is bitten by a vampire and starts to turn into one himself while trying to maintain some semblance of his former life. A logline, a summary, a breakdown of this film could never do it justice, as you have to see it to believe it.
I got it to Barbara Zitwer, and she gave it to her friend Barry Shills. They said, well, we're going to try to make it.
Well, Barbara Zitwer was my producing partner on the film. we were working together for a filmmaker named Larry Cohen, who makes horror and thrillers. Do you know his work? There's actually a recent documentary that came out about him that's pretty good. It kind of gives you the sense of what a guerrilla filmmaker he truly was. You know, he was always running around trying to grab everything for free in the middle of New York and stopping traffic. And he had his own version of King Kong, which was this giant bird god at the top of the Chrysler Building.
That's producer Barry Shills. Barry has the flair of a breezy Norma Desmond, in that every word, every breath, has the chance to be a show-stopping number.
It was there where I met Barbara Zitwer. I was his production manager and his assistant director on a few films in the 80s. And it was great because, you know, he was like a Hollywood filmmaker, but at the same time, he wanted everybody to do like 12 jobs. I mean, part of that was to save money, but for us, we were hungry filmmakers. I was the production manager, but Barbara, I hired her to be a location scout on some horror film we did. Maybe it was called The Return to Salem's Lot or The Stuff. You know, Larry would sometimes say to us, oh, let's shoot this in Little Italy, you know? And it's like, Larry, that takes months of planning, you know? I mean, Francis Ford Coppola will spend a fortune going to look. And he says, oh, we'll see if you can get me a corner or something. And Barbara Zitwer went down there, and she got us the whole street. And after that, we were just a great team. You know, we were in our prime. We were able to get any corner in New York for whatever it took. And Larry trained us to be really quick and fast and know how to get a lot for, you know, when you don't have enough money and all that kind of stuff. So that's where I met Barbara. And I met Joe as Barbara's boyfriend at the time. By the time the film got made, they were no longer a couple. But she was very instrumental in terms of getting him to write the script. And then Barbara said, write Barry and I a script so that we'll get the movie made for you to direct, you know. So that's how it all started. And then as it went along, Joe eventually bowed out as the director. I was sad to see that happen, but it worked out. But it went through a few stops and starts before we really got it going.
I thought it was darkly funny, and it was, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic, and I thought it was very doable for an independent, low-budget film, which is what we intended to make. Well, we had to raise money, and we had to find financing for the film, and that took a while. You know, we had been trying to make the film for a long time, and we went to everyone under the sun, and you have to talk to as many people as you have to talk to over as many years as you need to get the money. You know, when we started our company, Barry and I raised seed money from some wealthy people, and we got money from a pig farmer somewhere and there, and we had to go to their office and, you know, pitched our project and our dream and our film and what we were going to do. We went to the blackjack table in Atlantic City to pitch to someone who was eating steak in between gambling. She was a big gambler, and we had to, you know, talk about the film, the budget, what we were going to do. We had to lay out our business plan. But, you know, raising money for a film is you're selling someone on a dream, really. But we finally did find financing with a man named John Daly at a company called Hemdale.
Hemdale Film Corporation.
So basically what I was saying is we thought it would be great for Joe to direct, but by the time the thing finally... Oh, I know what I wanted to say. Larry Cohen would sometimes finance his own movies, like he would sell a script to Hollywood, back in the day, like Phone Booth, and then he'd take the money and make a low-budget film in New York that he would direct. But he eventually got into business with a guy named John Daly, who you'll see on the credits was our executive producer. John Daly and Derek Gibson were from England, but they opened up an office in Hollywood, and they were sort of like the British Hollywood version of Miramax, and I don't mean the current Harvey Weinstein. I mean, in the old days, a source to get independent films financed and released if they weren't exactly, studio type fare. And John Daly really got a lot of important filmmakers going, including Oliver Stone. He financed Platoon and The Last Emperor. He made quite a lot of interesting films. Also, the Terminator movies he made, which you would think are very mainstream now, but at the time, I suppose the money he made on the Terminator is what financed Vampire's Kiss. But John had met us with Larry, and he knew we were like production managing and line producing Larry's films. And he thought, wow, these guys know how to bring something in for not much show, I mean, that's what it always comes down to. Get a lot on the screen for as little as possible. By today's standards, it would seem like a big budget because everything is shrunk with digital technology, et cetera. But, we had about a $3 million budget all in, but it was all shot on 35, and actors like Nick Cage were put up in nice hotels, in lieu of being paid a lot of money, and, it all adds up. But knowing John Daly made the financing, it just worked. And also the timing. Joe got After Hours made by Martin Scorsese, and suddenly he was a hot writer, and we had a financier who trusted us. All those things have to come together.
He would give you total freedom. You could do whatever you wanted if you came in on a certain budget, and that you cast it with a star that he thought was bankable. So when we met John and, pitched him and did the budget, he agreed to give us the money for the film.
And before you know it, we were in production. I was kind of the one that often had to keep everybody from getting too crazy because Barbara and Joe had been in a relationship that was breaking up. And I would say, come on, we're about to go into a meeting. Calm down and behave yourself. But, I mean, it really fueled the energy of the film in a weird way. My memories are that we got very little sleep, that we were working around the clock, but we were having the time of our lives. We were thrilled. This was our first feature film that we were in charge of. There were constant problems, but we were solving them.
Well, we had different actors before Nick Cage. We originally wanted Dennis Quaid, and Dennis was attached for a year to the project, and it was a time when Joe Mignon was going to direct the film, and we went around for a year with Dennis, and we had everything together, and then Dennis was offered $1 million to be in Inner Space with Spielberg, so he dropped out. So our funding fell through, and we had to find another star. And then the next actor that we chose, I believe, was not Judd Hirsch. He was in The Breakfast Club. Yeah, it's like I'm blocking him from my mind because we cast him for a short while, and then he also pulled out shortly after he was approved to do the Billionaire Boys Club. So we were very upset with him. And then Nicolas was someone who had read the script on his own and had wanted to do the film desperately, but we had cast these other people, and then finally we had no star, so we went to Nicolas, and that's how we got Nicolas. And he turned out to be the most brilliant.
And we used to work out of this loft where I was living down in Tribeca back in the early 80s. I was sort of a pioneer down there. And I had to go out. I think I was involved in editing some music video or something. And we were waiting for Nicolas Cage's agent to call us back, Ed Lamato. He's now deceased. He also represented Mel Gibson and Michelle Pfeiffer and Richard Gere, on and on. And he just wouldn't return our phone calls because he didn't want Nicolas to do the movie. But Nicolas wanted to do it, and we were introduced to Nicolas by some friends of ours, so we had a chance to know that firsthand. But finally, I marched onto the set of Moonstruck, and I said to Nicolas, if your agent doesn't return our phone call, we are definitely, you're the best, Nick, but we got to go to somebody else. I had to march onto the set of Moonstruck, and he was had an early cell phone in those days, one of those giant things. And he called his agent right there, and he said, why aren't you calling them back? I want to do this movie. It's brilliant, blah, blah, blah. He said, Barry Schultz is right here. And he said, I'll tell them I'll call them later today. So we went back to this loft space we were working out of as an office, and I had to leave, and it was already 8 o'clock at night, New York time. So it was, only 5 o'clock in LA. So Barbara, I said, please don't leave until you really have to, so you can take the phone call if it comes. And I had an answering machine that only worked if you literally plugged it in. The button didn't work anymore. You had to get down on the ground and plug it in. And I said, just make sure you at least plug in the answering machine before you go so we know if he actually called. This is what producers go through to get their brilliant movie made. It comes down to that. So I returned somewhere around midnight or after, and there she is still. And I said, what happened? She says, he called, but I had to stay because a mouse ran by and I got scared. I didn't want to plug the answering machine in, so I stayed. And Ed Lamato just called 10 minutes ago. He called at 10 of midnight, New York time, thinking he would get an answering machine. Instead, he got Barbara Zitwer, who hadn't gone home yet because a mouse ran by and she didn't want to have to plug the thing in. So here she is, this incredibly strong, brave woman, but scared of a mouse. And, it's these little things. It's if they hadn't happened, you wonder if the movie would have ever gotten made. And then Nick Cage fell in love with the idea of Joe Mignon directing the film because he thought After Hours was just brilliant, and Joe had an amazing vision, and Nick just loved that idea of this young writer directing it. But, Joe is brilliant, and he has directed some films, but he's not a big people person, if that's, I hate that term, but I'll use it anyway. As a director, you really have to lead an entire set and run, a company of 40, 50 people every day. It takes a certain personality, or you need an awful lot of support. But, we were prepared to support Joe on it, Barbara and I. But he just, for whatever reason, he bowed out. And then, we started looking for new, at different directors. And then Barbara and I honestly started looking to England for a director because after Joe dropped out, we couldn't sleep. And we were in LA and we wanted to save our movie and we didn't want to lose Nick Cage and lose our financing. So the only people that were up at 2:00 in the morning, LA time, were the agents in London. Literally. And honestly, they're a lot easier to get a hold of than the ones in Hollywood, who have all kinds of barriers between them and producers, to try to like get you to go back and find more money, for their clients, et cetera. In London, there really seemed to be, at least to us, like they were more interested in the art of it all. And we hit it off with this agent, and that's who introduced us to Bob. Bob had done some magnificent commercials that were darkly humorous and very visual. And he had done this one film with Leslie Ann Warren for HBO, but it wasn't exactly like he was the hottest director, But then he happened to be coming to LA. Barbara and I were like, working nonstop to keep this movie alive. And he came to LA to shoot a commercial, and we all got together for dinner and had a great time and were laughing. And he said great things about the script, and we just knew we would enjoy each other's company. And
I had been offered a number of movies in Hollywood, and I think what gets around is there's a sort of a buzz goes around about directors. I was an up-and-coming, interesting, new British directors. And in the 80s, British directors had a real special cachet about them. Plus, I was picked up by Paramount and Fox to do movies. So I was known about in America. I think they came to my agent in London, who happened to represent some very interesting British directors. So there's me, a guy called Stephen Frears. So there was a few of us that was represented by this woman called Jenny Casarotto. And I think that they made a relationship call with her. And I'm guessing, to be honest with you, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how they came to me. But I wasn't the first choice. I wasn't the first director on the movie. And they never told me who was. I remember reading the script in my office, and scripts have structural points. There are page numbers where things need to happen, big turning points in the center, all those things. I don't think the script had any of that. It was just a sort of linear ramble of insanity, but funny and sad, I think I really connected with what Joe was writing, understood what he was saying. I understood all the metaphorical levels that it was on. And I thought it was a very good basis of something that was hitting the time. This came to me in 86 or 87. So things were really, really electric at that period. The financial system had been deregulated. So there was a massive explosion of money. There was a massive explosion of AIDS. So, you're probably too young to know, but there was an AIDS epidemic that was literally exploding in the Western world. So there were many, many extraordinary things happening. And the script seemed to just touch little areas of this extraordinary thing happening, particularly for young men living in a big city who were very lonely and not understanding relationships or love. So it seemed to be a very interesting way to pick out the problems and the emotional journeys that young people were going through in a big metropolitan city.
It's a bit surprising that Barry and Barbara clicked so well with Bob Bierman, as he is their opposite. He's soft-spoken and could easily fade into the back of a room. He described himself as a character from Winston Churchill's biopic The Darkest Hour. And then he quickly pointed out that he was by no means saying that he was Churchill, but rather one of the other guys in the room. And that resolute demeanor that got the Brits through World War II would be tested, because as soon as Bob Bierman signed on, Nicolas Cage dropped out.
Well, what happened was Joe was supposed to direct the film, and Nick signed on with Joe directing the film, and Nick signed on for very little money. And then Joe dropped out, and I think Nick was, and his agents, which never wanted him to do the movie to begin with, used that as a reason to have him leave the picture, because they said we were very disingenuous, we were going to get a big director, and we'd pay him no money, and, blah, blah, blah. And he didn't really, it got signals were very mixed about what had happened, and we were trying to stay afloat and, keep everything copacetic and not reveal what was really going on.
And then, of course, we lost Nicolas Cage. So it's like, the domino effect. You lose your director, you lose your star.
I don't remember feeling devastated, because I was experienced in making lots of commercials. I'd made a movie, and I'd had a really rough time on my first movie with the lead actress, tried to jeopardize the film. So I had some experience of how difficult actors could be. So this really didn't really, I wasn't massively affected by it. I don't know if in my heart of hearts I thought he'll be back, but when we started to move forward to replace Nick, I knew it was going to be a very difficult job. And I think maybe subconsciously I was just carrying on working, waiting for him to come back, or thinking he will come back. And, we had the luxury of sitting around I think we sat around for 2-3 weeks, maybe a month. I can't remember how long. It seemed to go on forever, doing nothing, just, fiddling around with pre-production. Because if you haven't got a lead man, you can't cast anybody. You go, who's going to be the females in it? Well, there are no females because there's nobody to attach them to. So I couldn't physically do anything creative. Well, I mean, I could find some locations and, bits and pieces, but I couldn't physically do any creative work on the film. I couldn't do anything on the script. I couldn't do anything on the casting because I didn't know who was in the film. The film was kind of meaningless in a way. I couldn't really put my finger on what the film was going to be about. I don't know why Hemdale kept going, I'll be honest with you. Today, that film would have been shut down. The truth was, we were paying Nick so little money. We were paying him like $60,000. I mean, his agents didn't want him to do it because he was getting paid millions of dollars to do movies. Moonstruck would have been hugely successful. He was up there big time. And when he pulled out, we had to look around and keep the film on track. It's like your fiance's pulled out of the wedding and you go around looking for another girl to get married to. You can find lots of girls, but they're not the one that you loved and thought was going to spend the rest of your life with you. So, to be honest with you, I would go to the movies twice a day. We'd just get pointing at people on the screen, say, he's really good. He could do it. Of course, he couldn't do, he could read the script, but he couldn't do what Nick was going to do.
As a matter of fact, here I am telling this story for a podcast. When we lost Nicolas Cage after we lost Joe Mignon, there was a brief time when we were auditioning people and also thinking of other stars who could possibly do it. And at one point, I got the brainstorm that maybe Steve Martin could do this. And they were shooting Three Amigos in Culver City on that Washington lot that looks a little bit like Gone with the Wind, some old buildings. Do you know which one I'm talking about? Yeah, Culver Studios. And I had a friend who was working for a producer that had an office on the lot. He got me onto the lot. And I came with a FedEx package, I was a FedEx messenger, and I knocked on the trailer of Steve Martin, and he was in there playing Scrabble with Chevy Chase and Martin Short in their sort of Mexican outfits, waiting to be called to set. And I went in there and I said, oh, hi. I introduced myself. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Steve, could I talk to you a minute? And I wanted to talk to you about a script written by the author of After Hours, because After Hours, I love that film. I was like, great, okay. Well, this is his next script. It's, just as dark and just as funny. It's about a guy who thinks he's turning into a vampire, but he's a literary agent in modern era. And I had Steve Martin in the palm of my hand. He was like grabbing the script, and then Chevy Chase went, "Don't talk to him, Steve. Get out of here. This is how people get sued in this town," which I don't completely understand. I mean, I was producing the script, but whatever. You really have to go through agents. But I was tired of, going through agents.
We had gotten some money from Hemdale. They gave us a little. We had a production office open, and we had the art director and the set designer working, and the casting director. We had a skeletal staff. We were on Varick Street, and then everything fell apart. But my parents lent us money and kept the office going and paying the art director and the set designer, and we just had to recast it. There was never a situation that I felt I was in that it was not going to happen. It was just a series of challenges that we had to solve to make this happen. In the production, it was a very unusual group of people who were so passionate and committed. We were so young. I mean, there was no question that we were going to make this movie. It was just when and who's going to star in it.
I think we were worried the film would shut down. And the thing about the exec producers, John Daly, John is a very, very, he's unfortunately not with us now, he was a very daring man. He was a boxer, fighter, and he put on huge boxing matches. He was the guy behind Rumble in the Jungle when it shut down and they had no money to pay for the fight. That was John Daly. I think he quite liked the idea that it had all imploded and was quite interested to see what we were going to do. The money people kept very cool. They never really interfered with us. I mean, I think they were paying a small amount of money for the pre-production to keep going, but they never came back and said, we're going to shut the film down. I think they just kept saying, well, go on, find a replacement.
Unable to find a viable star, the production was running on fumes. And then seemingly out of nowhere, the prodigal son, Nicolas Cage, returned.
He wanted to speak to me. He didn't want to speak to the producers or the exec. He only wanted to talk to me. It was a very fast and tricky situation because I was in my office. The producers were in their office. We were in a big building disused building in New York where our offices were. So they were on the extension listening into my conversation, which was supposed to be a private conversation with me and Nick, but they couldn't stop themselves listening. I knew that it was a big emotional decision that he was making, because normally these things are done through agents, ring producers, they do really look at the deal. This wasn't about deals, money, schedule, nothing. It was purely a creative, emotional decision. So when he came back to talk to me, I knew it was a personal thing. But I had to sort of calculate the situation very quickly. And my gut reaction was, do not accept him back immediately. Listen to him, listen to what he's got to say, express your thanks for coming and, asking for the film back. Because, the thing was, the power had shifted away from him. He was asking to come back, which is very different from me asking him to come back. He was under a lot of pressure from his agents and other people. He was a young man to pull out. And he knew that he'd put this film into total jeopardy. He knew, Nick is a very, very smart guy. And in his mind, there was another actor, another two actors lined up to play the part. So he really wanted this part now.
Bob Bierman had just said, let me think about it, to Nicolas Cage. We need to take a moment to break down the ramifications and weight of what Bob Bierman was doing here. If he had just said yes to Cage, first and foremost, Barry Shills wouldn't have to break into any more dressing rooms. With Cage, the sputtering production now has a star, which in Hemdale's eyes makes it a go picture, which also means money rolls back into the coffers from someone other than Barbara's parents. So needless to say, everyone else really, really wants Nicolas Cage on board, because it sets everything in motion. Now with Bob saying, "Let me think about it," instead of saying yes to Nick, he's putting the production and his job on the line. You see, the producers want to make a movie far more than they want to make a Bob Bierman movie. If Bob doesn't want to work with Cage, they can easily find someone who will. But it's not just that. If the industry got wind of Bob being fired for this, it would sabotage his career moving forward. You have to be a bankable entity to overcome your difficult label, and Bob's career was far from established. So in effect, everything was on the line with Bierman's decision. And even though Bierman swore he was no Winston Churchill, the move was positively Churchillian.
And the producers went insane when I put the phone down, because they said, why did you? And I said, when I ring him tomorrow and, accept him back, he will never leave again. This day that he waits will cement him to this film forever. And that's what I needed. I couldn't go on to make the film with an actor that could, change his mind all the time. There was, for me as a director and as a filmmaker, if I didn't lock him in emotionally to this picture, we'd never make the film. So there was a pragmatic need from my part to have Nick completely and utterly and totally locked in with me on the film. He rang the following day and I said, "Okay, I've thought about it, you can come back." Maybe that little bit of time had actually helped to cement him totally to our film. And it was only when Nick came back on board and he came up from LA, and I think we did a week's rehearsal, then I could see that the film was going to take this really interesting and quite different journey to perhaps the way anybody thought it was going to go, including the producers and Hemdale.
With Nicolas Cage signing on, they were getting a rising star. But he wasn't Tom Cruise in stature or artistic temperament. Cage's eccentric performance in Vampire's Kiss didn't come from nowhere. He had previously injected his surrealistic acting into films that didn't want or require it. He almost got himself fired from his uncle Francis Ford Coppola's movie Peggy Sue Got Married for doing exactly that. He took a straightforward boyfriend role and infused it with a prepubescent Pokey from Gumby voice. The choice was odd, uncalled for, and completely unreasonable. Years later, he toned it down a little bit, thanks to the Coen brothers breaking Cage like a wild stallion, shutting down his crazier ideas on Raising Arizona. But as recently as Moonstruck, Cage put on a strong, thick Italian accent, even though he's a Coppola. So the absolutely gonzo Nick Cage was lurking closely in the shadows. He just needed a vehicle to unleash his expressionistic acting, and this low-budget indie was it.
Day one, scene one, 7:45 in the morning, and I went into his dressing room just to see how the costume was and talk about what we were going to do, and this came up.
Nicholas showed up on set with a penciled-in mustache, sort of, a little bit like a John Wooders look, and clearly penciled in. I mean, it was an interesting choice, but for the last minute, when you've got $3 million finally in the bank and the entire crew waiting, one little hairline pencil thing can throw the whole thing off. I mean, the camera's in the star's face. It's like a landscape, I mean, all we could think about is the pencil mustache. Everyone will be looking at that.
What had happened was he had been with or had been at a party or was friends with this singer-actor. I can't remember what his name is, a very famous guy who has a pencil-thin moustache on. And it was very much like the moment when, he said to me, "I'll come back on the film." And I had to make a very, very quick decision, because Nick is very quick and very smart, on how to make the situation work. And when he said, I want to put this moustache on, or whether he had the moustache on, I can't remember, I thought, this is a disaster. There is no way we can make this movie with this pencil-thin moustache on. There were two things. One is I thought it was a horrible idea. I mean, truly horrible. Secondly, I just thought it would destroy his character from minute one he was on screen. You know, people would hate him. Not hate him, but they'd just think he's silly. And he should never be silly. You know, you should feel pity for him. Maybe you dislike him. But you know, I thought he would look silly and he would be laughed at as a clown. I just thought, you know, I can't go, I haven't got a half an hour to discuss this. I can't go through all the trials and tribulations of the character and why. I just, you know, I couldn't just say it's wrong. I never wanted to ever see this moustache ever again, because that wouldn't have helped. So I had to think very quickly on how to deviate his belief in this moustache away from it. And what I came up with was the fact that the film was about a guy who wanted to turn into a vampire, and so he was constantly examining himself and putting himself in this kind of role. And I said the big thing about the role of a vampire, and it also is to do with the female character as well, the vampire teeth that she has for real, and then you buy the teeth and you try to simulate being a vampire, you know, in your mind, this is going to get you close to the woman you love, blah, blah, blah. So I concentrated his mind and the way the character was developing. I said, if you've got a moustache on, that what you're doing is that you're almost upstaging your mouth, and what you want to be looking at is your teeth. You don't want to be looking at any growth or moustache above that that's going to distract from it. It will, you know, make your character less good because you're stopping the dramatic flow. And so he bought into that absolutely and understood. So I did it very much for him as an actor and a character. And I also did it for me because I thought it would actually ruin the film.
And we convinced him to take it off, but, you know, in the doing, he came up with this other idea of this accent that was a little pretentious and phony. Yeah, I think, you know, Nicolas was, you know, inspired by someone he knew very well that he was kind of channeling. I won't say who that was, but...
A quick, no need to Google it interlude. Cage based the accent on his father, a professor at Cal State Long Beach in comparative literature.
Alva, there is no one else in this entire office that I could possibly ask to share such a horrible job. You're the lowest on the totem pole here, Alva. The lowest. Do you realize that? Every other secretary who's been here longer than you, Alva. Every one. And even if there was someone here who was here just one day longer than you, I still wouldn't ask that person to partake in such a miserable job as long as you were around. That's right, Alva. It's a horrible, horrible job. Sifting through old contract after old contract. I couldn't think of a more horrible job if I wanted to. And you have to do it. You have to, or I'll fire you. Do you understand? Do you?
Well, Barry and I were on the set, and I think we were like, what the fuck? Like, you know what I'm saying? I mean, we were like, oh my God, what is this? He's like, this is like ridiculous. I mean, we thought it was horrendous. Like, he's going to ruin the movie. This is like, we didn't know what it was. It was like horrible. And we were freaking out. So after the filming, Barry and I went to talk to Bob, the director, and we're like, Bob, what is he doing? I mean, it's like, so Bob just said, well, did you laugh? And we said, yeah, but it was like ridiculous. And he said, it was very intentional. They discussed this. They discussed the accent. They discussed the performance. And that if Nick had done it straight, it would be unwatchable because he's a pretty disgusting character. And then we're like, okay.
They did worry on the first few days of dailies. They said to me, Bob, are you sure this is all okay? They were very, very polite. And they said, have you noticed Nick's accent? He's got this weird accent. And I said, yeah, this is good. What's happening? Why is he doing that? I said, this is a part of his transformation, that because they didn't know where he was coming from, because you shoot a film out of order, that we were like maybe halfway through his transformation when we shot the first scene. So they thought that was his normal accent. They didn't realize that, things were changing. So I think there was a bit of shock about, what is going on here? And what they didn't realize, which I explained to them, is that he will go back to being more normal Peter Lowe. When he emotionally changes, everything changes with him. So I think the complexity of the character was hard to explain from looking at the first 2 days rushes, because it wasn't at the beginning of the film. It was, somewhere else in the film. And that was it. We just kept going.
I knew he had a strong visual quality, but he also gave Nicholas the room to really play and come up with some of his, wildness, which I think takes a terrific director to do. He wasn't trying to force Nicholas into some preconceived notion.
And then we got into it and realized it was completely brilliant. But when I first saw him doing it, I was like, oh my God, this is this is insane. It's ridiculous. What did I know? I think Nicholas knew for a long time that I was not a big fan of his. I think we butted heads because I was the producer and I was the one that really had to tell him what was going on and the truth about things that he could not do or we could not do. And I think that, my partner was very, sweet and accommodating. I was like the bad mother. I don't know how to explain it.
Barbara can move mountains. She's got an incredible personality, but she's not someone that can fade into the wallpaper very easy. She could be on screen herself, Barbara. She's definitely a powerhouse. And sometimes that came in so handy because she had the guts to, stand up to people, not only Nick Cage, but John Daly or whomever. Or, she's a great saleswoman too. I mean, she even, talked our Teamsters into giving some of their salary back to help pay for an orchestral score, because we didn't have enough money in the budget for an orchestral score, and that's what Bob wanted. We all thought it would be great. I thought it turned out great, and I'm really glad we did it. But that's the kind of force of nature Barbara is. She's really quite amazing. But also, she can be the bad cop easily, because it's like, if nobody wants to do it, or nobody, send Barbara that we're in, she'll say, she'll tell anything to anybody. But, Barbara, I don't know, we could make a movie about Barbara. But am I aware that she was having a hard time? I mean, my memories are that we got very little sleep, that we were working around the clock, but we were having the time of our lives.
Like, for instance, he wanted his girlfriend at the time to be cast as the vampire. And we didn't want to cast her, but I think he heard that I really didn't want her. I was the one, whatever. I wasn't the only one. She was totally wrong for the part. And then we cast Jennifer Beals, actually the night before she had to show up. Everyone thought she was totally great, but he hated her. he really did not like her. He didn't like working with her. I mean, maybe that was part of his acting, do you know what I mean, to torment her or create this relationship. I have no idea.
He hated her. So he wanted his girlfriend to play the part. He was going out with Patricia Arquette. She was massively young and tiny. There's a big problem with Nick. He's 6'2" or 6'3", so he's really tall. So you've got to be really careful who you cast with Nick. You know, if you have someone very small. I auditioned her, and she was really young. She was like 19, 18. I don't know. She was very young, so she couldn't. You know, she didn't have the strength of character to take this part on. And Jennifer had been the leading actress in Flashdance. You know, she was a movie star. There was no way that his girlfriend could be in the film. I think he broke up with her by the time we're shooting the film anyway. But at the time, he wanted to have her in the film. That I'd cast this up-and-coming star, this girl, beautiful girl. I don't know I can't remember who she was. Anyway, she was like biggest agent in New York's best new rising star. And she was very good. I auditioned her and everything, and she was fabulous and beautiful and exotic, all the things. And on the Friday, before the shoot on Monday, so we started shooting on the Monday, the Friday she pulled out. So we had no lead actress because she pulled out at 5:30 on Friday night. And she pulled out because she was getting married, and her fiancé said, "I'm not having you in bed with Nick Cage before we get married." So he put his foot down. It was like, no marriage if you go and make this movie and do stuff in bed with Nick Cage. So, you know, she got married, I suppose. I don't know. Anyway, she pulled out. After losing Nick, you know, losing a lead actress, it's just like it's like a normal day in the office. So we started shooting on Monday morning with no lead actress. And over the weekend, we looked at our list of who we'd like to be in the film. And the very first person we asked, who turned the film down because she was doing something else, was Jennifer Beals. So on Monday morning, while I was shooting, the producers rang Jennifer's agent, sent the script over. She read the script. They made an offer. She said, "I'd like to take a meeting." I took a meeting with her on Monday night after I finished shooting. We got on well. Tuesday morning, she was on set doing her first scene with Nick. When I told him it was Jennifer Beals, he just said, "Oh, I hate her." And I went, "Oh, well, she's in the film." "I think she's really good, Nick." "Yeah, well, I don't. I think she's awful. I hate her." So I went home and he went home. And I had a dream that night of him sticking needles in my eyes. I mean, this is how weird this film is. I've never done a film like this before, having dreams that the leading man is sticking needles in the director's eye. I mean, anyway, so I told him the next morning what he'd done in my dream. He found that extremely amusing. And it sort of helped the day because this was the kind of thing that really helped Nick, to understand that I was going through the same amount of torture that his character was. But it was very, very tense on the set with him and Jennifer, and we were on set together a lot. So there was a lot of tension. You know, what you have to do is understand both sets of points of view, but also you know that they will, in the end, deliver the goods. So if Jennifer had been difficult as well, and had been as difficult with this thing, it would have been really, really hard. But she was first of all, she's whip smart, probably smarter than Nick. I mean, just like in terms of, because Nick is like major smart, and she was major smart plus. So I think he was quite taken aback at how clever she was and how she could just talk with huge amounts of intellect. And that really set him back. And I think he got to appreciate her and understand her and realize why I'd cast her. Because he just thought, oh, she's that girl from Flashdance who just jumps around and does kind of welding and jumping and stuff and dancing. I don't think he could understand that she was really, really clever and a really talented actress with this persona that was so perfect. So as we carried on, it got less difficult. But, you know, he'd still do terrible things to put her off. I mean, awful, awful stuff. Like just before they're having a big love scene, he'd clear his nose of the most amazing amount of snot right in front of her. But she didn't bat an eyelid. Nothing would faze her.
Director of photography, Stefan Chapsky.
You know, Nick didn't talk to anybody. Nick wasn't particularly friendly. He was very introverted during the making of it. And he certainly didn't talk to crew people. And I don't think he really had a very friendly relationship with Bob Bierman, you know. One of the first things that we shot was, so she's in with him in bed, biting his neck. And what I liked about Bob Bierman right away was that he didn't talk publicly to the actors. He actually talked privately to Nick, even more privately to Jennifer. And I think he felt a little bit that Nick was overpowering her, you know. So I remember he whispered something, not whispered, he had a private conversation with, you know, Jennifer Beals. I think what he told her was to spit in Nicolas Cage's face. You know, so I just enjoyed watching it because it totally threw Nick off, you know. And I thought, wow, man, this guy is a really bold and brave and good director.
So there was a scene where she was topless and she had gaffer tape across her nipples, and she had white gaffer tape, and she'd written on them, "Hi, Peter." And you know, it was very difficult for her doing these scenes, but she lightened it all up and made Nick really very comfortable, because, you know, they weren't easy scenes for him. He'd never done scenes like this before. You know, in Moonstruck, it was all like kissing and stuff with Cher. He'd never done this kind of, you know, surreal sex stuff before. So if she hadn't have been giving so much support to him, he would have looked really bad. So I think he started to realize pretty early on, when we were doing quite physical stuff, that she was really helping his character. There's a wonderful scene where I think he's in her lap and she's stroking his head and he starts mournfully saying something. And it's a beautiful scene where he's completely surrendered to her. And I think at that point he had surrendered to the fact that she was really perfect for the role.
Nick and Bob didn't get along.
We never had. We didn't. They were. I mean, listen. I've been doing this for 40 years. I know what fights are. We were in love, man. There were no fights. I've seen fights on set, and no, it was out of 8 weeks of intense shoot. There was one night where we were shooting late, and I was trying. It was nothing. It was one of those things like, I need you to tear the paper like this. I can't tear the paper like this. I need to tear the paper. It was like nothing.
Nick didn't want to do it, you know. He didn't want to do, he said there wouldn't be a no. I don't know what the reason was, but basically he disagreed with it as a story point. So we went to shoot the piece that was after he pulled a note down. So we set up, and Nick went into the camera left corner and stood in the corner and pulled the note out and looked at it. You know, so you couldn't see him read the note. All you were at a shot of him with his back to the camera and, you know, with his nose in the corner of the room, you know. And so then Bob, who never was in a state of where he was showing any stress or any impatience. So his comment was, Nick, it sounded like, I'm not a good imitator in terms of dialects, but it sounded like Nick, that was you know, that was very, very good. You know, do you think perhaps you could turn and open up to the camera a bit? You know, and then Nick just went at him. You know, and I remember having to clear the room. Nick was too ready to insult and fight with Bob. You know, that probably was the most extreme example of not wanting to take direction. You know. He just didn't want to be interfered with, you know. It was obviously a very important project for him, you know, and he was tremendously passionate about it. But I also think he had a bit of an attitude of me against everybody else, you know, because Nick basically just stayed out of it, didn't really want to have anything to do with any of the crew people. He just wanted to come in and do his thing, you know.
So the next day, I think we did the cockroach, and maybe I was a bit petulant, but I wanted to make sure I got the shot, so I got him to eat it twice. So maybe there was a bit of payback. I don't know. But, you know. We created the cockroach scene. It wasn't in the script. In the script, he ate raw eggs. Anyway, I went to see this movie called, it was a very famous Japanese movie. Anyway, in it, there was a scene where a girl is sort of semi-naked and the guy eats a raw egg off her back. And we were shooting the raw egg scene that day. And I said to Nick, I don't think we should shoot the raw egg. It's not great. It's a bit too sort of lovey-dovey, and I've seen it in this film. Let's do something else. So we scrapped the scene and decided to shoot it later. And then we started to talk about what he should eat, because he'd eaten a pigeon, I think, before. His 101, which is from Orwell's 1984, the torture room is 101. But his biggest torture would be cockroaches. So we agreed on a cockroach. But it's not actually a cockroach, it's bigger. It's called a water bug. It's a New York water bug, which is bigger than a cockroach.
And I was not on the set that day, and Bob called me and said, well, Nicholas has this idea to eat a water bug, a cockroach, instead of the egg. And I'm like, oh my God, forget it. And he's going to get sick. And I, as the producer, I'm like, he's going to get sick, blah, blah, blah. That's ridiculous. You know, that's disgusting. I mean, I just went off. Nicholas and I butted heads quite often. And so this was the end of the shoot, and I couldn't take it anymore. And then Bob just said, Barbara, I think if Nicholas wants to eat a water bug on film, we should let him. And I was like, all right, let me call the doctor, because, you know, there's a doctor that works on every set, and just make sure it's healthy, you know. So I called the doctor, and he said, it's fine, and just have like a bottle of brandy or scotch, and he can swig it down after he, you know, eats the bug, and it'll take away any germs or whatever. So I got the go-ahead, and I wasn't there on the set that day, but Bob told me that he did it twice. They did 2 takes. And you know what? That's a scene that everyone remembers. They're like, oh, Vampire's Kiss. Oh, that's the movie where he ate the cockroach. Each thing along the way, I would be the one to say no, or this is what's happening, and we're not doing this. Like with the bat was originally designed by a great, brilliant young special effects designer in England, and he had worked on Greystoke. I had met him in London, and he was coming over to New York with this bat really as a favor, and he liked me, and he liked the project, and he had never been to New York. So we were getting this amazing special effects bat, and then right before he was coming over, he was killed at his sister's wedding in Paris. It was horrible. And so it was a great shock, and his assistant ended up coming over with the bat. It was damaged. It was a nightmare shooting the bat. But Nicholas he didn't understand why we couldn't have a real bat. And I tried to explain why you cannot have a real bat in a film shoot. And, you know, I explained over and over and over, and he just thought I didn't care. It's going to be hokey, blah, blah, blah. We found out that this assistant who we had dedicated to be with him, that Nicholas tried to buy a bat illegally from Mexico and bring it through FedEx to New York. I mean, it was so crazy.
You know, what are you going to do? I mean, I didn't want it to look fake, but he was sending PAs up to Central Park to go fetch real bats.
Yeah. With a water cooler.
You know, I was like, wait a minute, Nicholas. I think real bats have rabies, and when they get in the light, they don't want to come out. You know?
I mean, I've never seen a bat in Central Park. Maybe there's a bat. There are bats where I live in England. You can't catch a bat. I mean, you have to have huge nets and big, there's a guy running around with like fishing. It was pathetic. It was laughable. I let him run around all night doing it because he'd never catch anything. Because he said, Nick wants me to go out and he wants me to buy nets. And I said, you don't do anything, do everything, just keep doing it. And I think, the producers and I were all in favor of him running around doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So we knew this was going on, and we're like, oh, my God. Like, he's not listening to fact or science. He doesn't believe the head batologist or whatever, the bat expert at the Bronx Zoo. I had to do all this research, but, he's stuck with it.
Because Nick had got this thing in his head, very much like the moustache. So I know, again, there's no confrontation here. Let's do it. Go and do it. And it will, eventually, it just wore itself out.
Well, you have to understand, it was my first film as a producer, and everything was on my head. Do you know what I mean? And the money and the time. I mean, it was insane. I don't even know how we did it, but Nicholas was very young. He was like 23, and he was coming off Moonstruck, I think. But he was very young. And yes, I did think that I couldn't believe that I'm having a conversation and having to explain to him that bats fly away from the light. They're not controllable. They have rabies. You cannot train a bat. I mean, on and on and on. I went to the Bronx Zoo, to the bat specialist there, to explain to him. I found a bat farm in upstate New York where what you have to do if you want to use real bats is you have to build a set onto this bat farm room that they have, and you have to shoot in infrared light. And they also have rabies. I mean, you can't use a real bat. No one can use a real bat. It's like, you can't do it. So this went on day after day and week after week. And when we were shooting, it was like we were shooting two films. We had to shoot the bat, and then we would shoot the other parts.
But anyway, we made it work. It's the same bat that he didn't like, and it's all through fast cutting and maneuvering and good writing.
I think it was inexperience on all our parts, no money, fear. He was afraid that he was working so hard and we would make him look bad and it would be just like a schlock film. He didn't understand the style and what we all tried to do and how talented everyone was that worked on that film. Like, amazingly talented people who gave their all for, like, nothing. So it was things like that. We just, it was like oil and water, I think, personally. But I was the one who had to say no, and I was the one who was in charge, and, and I see that he was a perfectionist. And, I mean, he saved the movie, and it was brilliant what he did. But, for the actor, he just thought, this is schlock. These people are nothing. He comes from Hollywood royalty, and he doesn't know from us. And our attitude was, you're impossible. Just, you don't get it. Of course, you couldn't say that to him, but I just thought, what a jerk. He just seemed really, childish. And everything he did do was to try and make the work as good as it could be. And I realized that. When I was in the middle of it, I thought he's impossible. I can't take it. I thought he was very childish. And, also I just wanted things to move on, and I was very inexperienced. But after I realized, he's not a prima donna. He didn't care about, the accommodations or the lack of money we had for, anything. It was all about the work. When the film was over, I got, when he saw the cut of the film. I think he was in LA, I was in New York, whatever. But I got a message on my answering machine, which existed then, and he told me that he loved the film and it justified his decision to become an actor. And I didn't save it, but I was really happy.
With the movie now wrapped, all they had to do was release it. And as you've probably guessed, that wasn't the smoothest of operations either.
We also decided to, for some ridiculous reason, to open the film at the Boston Film Festival. And back in those days, Sundance wasn't quite so established yet. I mean, there was the Cannes Film Festival. Everyone knew that was great to be in, or Venice. But Sundance hadn't quite made its rep. But Boston was like a waste because we ended up getting a bad review from the Boston Globe, who just, Vampire's Kiss is the kind of movie that if you decide you want to hate it, you can find all kinds of reasons. I mean, people are saying Nicolas Cage, go back to acting school. I mean, they don't get what expressionistic filmmaking or acting is. They don't, here he is, a film critic for the Boston Globe. I'll tell you, it really turned me sour on Boston. But the worst part was we got Nicolas Cage to come with us and, promote the film. I think Jennifer Beals came too. And we were also excited. It was like one of those typical scenes where the Broadway reviews come out. In this case, it was the film festival reviews. And we get this horrible review where he attacked Nicholas. And Nicholas was so depressed after that, he just stopped doing publicity. I mean, these are the things that people don't realize can make or break a movie. Here's another funny story. Hemdale was not only our financier, they decided to release the film. And they hadn't done much of that before. They had financed films like Platoon and The Last Emperor, but they came out through Orion Pictures, which was, a studio. Well, Hemdale decides to get going on the distribution business with our film. And, sometimes you think, oh, well, maybe that means they'll really get behind it and they'll push it.
The film opened 2 years after, or a year. It was supposed to be distributed by a great distributor, and then Hemdale had a fight with them or whatever. So that fell apart.
Well, they scheduled it to come out the same weekend as Batman 1. I don't know if you remember the hype around Batman 1. There was so much hype, we just got lost. And it was a very hot weekend. And in New York, it was maybe 100 degrees, that kind of weekend. We were in 2 or 3 theaters in New York on, the opening week. One of them was on the Upper East Side, the Sutton, I think. I remember Barbara was so excited, the Sutton Theater.
Vampire's Kiss opened in 4 theaters in New York that summer. And I got a limo and some champagne. I just remember me and Bob driving around in this ridiculous limo, and we went from theater to theater. We go into the first theater, and there's no one in the theater, and there's no air conditioning. And it's getting worse and worse. Then we go down to Times Square, and Bob is now Barbara, you go into the theater. It's too horrible. I can't. And as I'm walking out of the car, I see a homeless person with a TV set under his arm walking out of the theater. And it's these are our people, and it was one of the hottest summers, and basically the air conditioning was out in 2 or 3 of the theaters.
We get there, there's a sign where you buy the tickets, it says, enter at your own risk, air conditioning broken. So it's 100 degrees outside. We go in there. It's opening weekend. Nobody's in there. I mean, they basically said, go away.
So Barry and I, this was the biggest achievement of the opening of Vampire's Kiss. We got the theater to put the air conditioning on and fix it in one of the theaters.
But then, of course, your distributor on the West Coast, where the weather's perfect, they're like, well, what do you mean? Why are the ticket sales so bad? You know, because they're trying to decide how much money to spend on advertising for the following week. So, you know, it was constant setbacks like that.
It was a disaster.
But John had put a lot into it, and he didn't care. He just released it. In fact, he released it bigger than it was going to be released. He was completely undaunted by it. But when it came out, certain people reviewed it really well. So the most important critic was this woman called somebody Kale. She got it, and she gave it a terrific review. Then other people didn't get it, but that's not our fault, but it was the time it came out. There was nothing to compare it to. And they didn't know if it was a horror film or was it they didn't understand that it was a heightened reality film about, you know, a young guy going through a terrible, lonely period of his life with no romance and, you know, things not working out and fantasize. You know, they couldn't see the various levels of how it was, you know, but that's our fault. You know, we didn't make the film for the time. You know, Crocodile Dundee was the big hit.
You know, because after waiting for it to come out, and I was waiting for it to come out as a showcase, because it was one of the first movies I shot, and you know, it was like a blow to read in the New York Times that criticizing the movie and criticizing the director Bob Bierman for not being able to control Nicolas Cage. And you can't control, you know, Nicolas Cage.
Well, the thing was that, you see, I wasn't an American. I was British. I worked in America. So my plan was to do another movie in America. And this didn't allow me to do a lot of big movies that I was going to do. The only film I was offered to shoot was a film called I Married an Axe Murderer. They sent it to me and said, we really want you to do it. And I read it, and it was quite funny, but I thought, oh my God, this is the rest of my life. I mean, it's very Hollywood to go, oh, I know what you do. You do the kind of like funny things where people go weird. And it was, you know, it seemed like a lesser version of what I'd just done. It didn't seem like I was moving forward. So what I did was I actually did something complete opposite. I did a huge period miniseries for the BBC, the biggest thing they'd ever done. So I sort of went the complete opposite direction rather than go doing another film that was very similar.
You know, I shot my total wad on Vampire's Kiss. We ended up making like no money. It cost a fortune in the end. I totally basically changed my life, and I did not make films, and I lost touch with most of the people who went on to very illustrious film careers, many of them, and I gave up filmmaking. It was a very painful experience for me. I loved it. It was like the greatest experience to actually fulfill my dream of making a film completely free and having final cut and doing whatever I wanted to do, basically with the most amazing group of people. And to accomplish that, and then it was like I fell off the cliff into oblivion. So I really didn't think about the film or talk about the film, or, you know, I try to bury it, I think, in my psyche and everything. I had a nervous breakdown. Well, I didn't have a nervous breakdown in terms of I wasn't hospitalized, you know, but I think that I was very naive, and I was very single-minded. This is the way I am. It's like, I'm making this film, and that's it. You know, did you say, was I scared? Was I nervous? Was I this? Never. I had my goal, and it was going to happen. And then I didn't really know the business or what other people did or how this would happen again. I just thought, oh my God, I made this film. It's incredible. We did it. We came in on budget. We were fantastic producers. The production value is incredible. And it's just going to happen again. I didn't know how that would happen again. I just assumed it would happen again. You know, I made a film, I'll make another one. You know, and I guess if my film had opened and been a big hit like Sex, Lies, and Videotape, or, you know, if it had been a huge hit, other opportunities would have come my way. But I felt like, and maybe this was just me because everyone went off in Hollywood and became so illustrious, but I felt like I fell off a cliff. And it took me a few years to come to terms with it. And I loved film so much, I would go to movie theaters and just cry. Like, why can't I do that? You know, I was like very emotional and not mature, I guess, and understanding of the business. And actually, when I understood the business and what producing is, and what you have to do, I realized later in life, and now, I don't want to be a producer because the thing I love the most is really working with the creators, finding material, developing it, working with the artists, actually doing and making it, the deal making, the money, the on-set producing, the cater, all of that which I could do and am good at. Was horrible. It was so stressful, and I just would never do that again for anybody.
The film was dead and gone. But then a force came along that could finally understand Vampire's Kiss. The internet. And the internet fell deeply and madly in love with the picture, giving the film the rare distinction of being the most famous recitation of the alphabet.
How could somebody misfile something? What could be easier? It's all alphabetical. You just put it in the right file, according to alphabetical order. You know, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. Huh? That's all you have to do.
Very good. You know your alphabet.
I never misfiled anything! Not once, not one time!
And through memes and YouTube classics like Nicolas Cage Freaks Out, its legend began to grow, which finally gave Barbara Zitwer the screening she always wanted.
I only got an inkling of, like, that it was becoming a cult film when a few years ago, Barry Shills called me. And he said, Lincoln Center, the film festival, is having a midnight screening of Vampire's Kiss. And I'm like, really? How cool. Like, he called me that morning or something. And so I went, and I hadn't seen the film in years. The theater was not packed, but it was kind of filled up. And they were like young. It looked like a lot of NYU students, guys, and they were laughing. And you know, I was like, wow, this is, you know, how cool is this? And then we left the theater, and I saw someone, I don't know, I was talking to someone, and he told me that he had seen the film when it first opened, and he thought it was really sad or depressing or I don't know what. And now he thought it was really funny. He said, oh, it's hysterical. I just thought, well, people didn't get it at all, that it was a comedy. And people were getting it now. Then, this was like 2 or 3 years ago now, that the Museum of Modern Art screened the film, and this was like a huge honor. And, you know, a lot of the crew and people, Bob came over from London, and I was really touched to hear from Stefan and some other crew people there that it was as special for them as it was for me. We were all there, And there were more people because the place was packed. It was totally sold out at the Museum of Modern Art. And I thought there are more people that are watching this film today in this audience than ever in all the years when it was released. And people loved it. And then that's all I know.
You know, now John Daly's deceased and Hemdale has been shuttered and their entire library has been sold, you know, numerous times till now it's finally landed with MGM. So the good news is there's a, you know, studio distributor that's still in business, that keeps the film out there on television, you know, on video, re-releasing it. But, you know, I'm sure it's made them a lot more money than they're telling us it's made. But that's another story altogether. I'm happy it's out there and it's played in like 50 countries. You know, it definitely, but, you know, like a lot of dark comedy, you know, Joe Mignon was a little bit ahead of his time. He's an important writer of, you know, his generation. And, you know, now audiences are so used to black comedies, you know, watching cable and HBO. And in those days, like, to have your main character be a guy who's running around like going crazy and trying to bite people's necks and eat pigeons on the street, you know, I mean, it was definitely pushing the limits a little. But it was this British company, Hemdale, that liked that kind of thing. He kept thinking, you know, edgier the better.
Our film was completely unstraightforward in every way. You know, it was hard to digest. But, you know, as it's happened, it's been digested 20, 30 years later.
I am a believer that if something is got quality and it's unique and original and, you know, even if it's as offbeat as hell, eventually it'll find its audience. But, you know, it's not so easy. Sometimes you think, oh my God, what else can go wrong?
It was a very precious, free, incredible time that of my life, I think of everyone's life. Everyone was at their peak and did it for passion. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about, we were just all free to do whatever we wanted. It was a defining moment in so many people's lives, I think. They went on, but I feel so lucky that I made Vampire's Kiss at the time when I did, because it would be impossible to work the way we did now. Impossible. It was like the end of being totally free to do whatever you wanted, I guess.
Barry Shills went on to direct Joe Mignon's next feature, Motorama. And Barbara Zitwer, she went on to follow in Peter Lowe's footsteps. She became a literary agent and is responsible for bringing new wave Korean literature to America, including several bestsellers. And of course, Nicolas Cage became Nicolas Cage.
You know, I used to spend time with Nick after the shoot, and we'd go for drinks, and we went to the movies together, and we, you know, went up his, you know, I got him an apartment on the top of this rock and roll hotel called the Mayflower, which is no longer there, but it was the big rock and roll hotel. And he loved it, and he brought his cat over from LA, and the cat used to wreck the room every day, and I'd, you know, get the people to come and try and tidy the room up. So, and he brought skeletons of animals with him. You know, Nick is an extraordinary person, and he brought some props with him to, you know, keep him on course.